everyone. Today we're going to talk crystals. Crystals can be anything from lead in your pencil, the graphite in your pencil, to the table salt on your table, to a beautiful necklace you wear, to even a stone that you find on the street might have it inside of it. That's called a geode when the crystals are inside. And what they all have in common, because they all look very different, is they all have a molecular structure of atoms or ions that are arranged in a regular grid pattern. So if they have that regular grid pattern, they are considered a crystal. Now, crystals all look very different. They have different densities, how hard they are, how heavy they are, how they look, how clear they are, how not clear they are. Those are all different things that chemists have to look at to see and identify different types of crystals. And the cool thing about crystals is when we look at them, they look so beautiful and they have all these different parts of them, and they're made up of different things, and sometimes they're even made in different ways. Some can be made by pressurized molten carbon that quickly cools. That's how diamonds form. Or some can be made where a solution evaporates, and that's how purple quartz crystal is made, and we call that amethyst. So all different types of crystals can be formed in different ways, and they can multiply themselves because of the way the earth works and moves, and just like this one. Look at how many crystals are on here. And they have so many different forms. When a shape is 3D and it has a top, side, bottom, back, that's a form. When it's flat like this, that's a shape. So today we're gonna talk about how we can take these beautiful crystal forms and try to draw those forms on our paper and make the viewer believe that it's a 3D form. So before we do that, let's crack open a geode and see what happens when we find crystals inside of a rock. And once we're inspired, we're gonna get going with our drawings. Here we go. You see those crystals? Pretty cool. And that's all right inside of that geode. All right, grab a scrap paper and draw a mountain and a V. And then you're going to draw a triangle a little bit longer than the mountain and a triangle that's a little bit longer than the V. Then connect both corners to the V. Good. Then you're going to connect the top and bottom with lines going vertical. And if you want, you can make it shine. Then make a zigzag for our diamond. Up, down, up, down, up, down. Connect the bottom and the top, and then make a V and connect the bottom of the V to each bottom of your zigzag. For our cluster of crystals, you're just going to make a bunch of towers. So to make a tower, you go up, and then on an angle, go up, and then come down on your angle, and then come down towards the bottom of your cluster. And then you can make some behind the front cluster. So I always like to work with my diamond or crystals that are closer first. Then create a triangle or square at the top, connect triangle or square towards the edges, and then connect any of those changes in planes to the bottom with straight lines. You can use a ruler when you're working on your big piece of paper. So here is all of our practice ones. And again, we're gonna make some crazy organic shapes, and anywhere there's a change in the shape, we are going to connect it downward towards the bottom of the cluster and make a bunch of lines and edges and just keep connecting it. You can make a texture at the bottom if you want as well. And then you're gonna choose your favorite one of these to do on your actual picture. So you can turn that paper over or grab a new piece of paper at this point. And I like to use a Sharpie, but you can definitely use a pencil if that's all you have to work with, or a pen. And you're going to make towers coming upward, or you can choose whichever one we just did in the last one. So if you want to just do a singular one, you can do that. You can do all types of different types of singular ones all over your paper. You can make up your own types of forms, but again, our goal here is trying to make it look like it's a form, like it's got a top, side, bottom, edge. So once you make those tall towers, connect triangle to the edges and then connect those corners downward. And I'm going to just keep kind of creating these different types of tower of crystals and connect it downward with some straight lines. Again, you can use a ruler to make it look a little bit more exact and a little bit more like those forms we talked about in the beginning of this video. Again, I'm connecting all the corners and shapes that I've created downward, so it looks as if we're looking down on it. The bigger your angle of lines are, the more it looks like you're looking down on that shape. And that's almost creating a one-point perspective, but it's not exact, so we're not gonna call it that today. And then you can make some type of texture of lines or half circles or curves at the bottom, so it looks like it's growing out of a cave or a stone or a rock or the earth. And just kind of finish up those textures. I'm gonna use watercolors to start with. If you do not have watercolors, in a couple minutes, I'm gonna show you a technique to use markers, just regular markers. So here we're gonna talk about using watercolors. You want not a lot of water and a lot of paint for the bottoms of your crystals, and at the tops of your crystals and the front of them, you want to use a lot of water, a little paint. So I normally just start with a lot of paint and kind of add that to the bottoms of all my crystals. And then while my brush still has a little paint on it, I'll dip it just in water and go straight from the water to my crystal and paint that watered down paint on the tops of my crystals. And what that gives it the illusion that the light is hitting it and it's the brightest part of the crystal. So again, just adding the water to the top here. And I'll go ahead and do the same thing to my tall tower of crystals, where I'm going to add some really dark paint at the bottom and then kind of really watercolor towards the top. And you can even at the end, once you're done, kind of dry brush some of those darker values at the very bottom as well. So watercolors are great because if you mess up, you can always add water and use a paper towel to blot it up if you get it a little too dark at the top. And so it's flexible in that aspect. Again, just making it dark on the edges and on the bottom, and then I'm adding a lot of water to the tops. And each place where the plane changes, you can even change the type of value to make it look darker on the edges, or if you want to make it look like there's an angle, you can add more paint or less paint. And so once I'm done, I'm going to cover it with a scrap paper, and I'm going to take my brush with paint and splatter everywhere and look like my crystal had just been formed. And I'm going to use both colors that I used in my crystals so that it kind of has unity among the paper, and it gives it a really nice composition and movement of color around my page. All right, now I'm going to show you how to do same technique but with markers. So if you don't have watercolors, you can use markers. And I'm going to do a different type of cluster. I'm going to do a tourmaline of crystals instead of the cluster I did before. So I'm just making a bunch of flat shapes, and these are going to be the tops of my tourmalines. And then each place where the shape changes, I connect a line going downward. And I always work bottom up or in front back, so I don't have to worry about erasing lines. So now that I have my front row done, then I'm going to make a few more on the next layer. And when I make the lines coming downward, I have to make sure I stop when I get to the shape below it so that it looks like that form. So it looks like that form is behind the form in front of it. Again, making sure you're trying to draw 3D forms instead of just normal shapes. And by making these lines going downward, it gives that illusion that these forms are coming upward and towards us. Once you're done creating all your lines and textures, you're going to choose 2 colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. So you really want to focus on choosing colors next to each other, analogous colors, so that they blend nicely when you add water. I'm going to do green and blue. You could do blue and red. Anything that are close on the color wheel will work nicely. Red and purple. But I'm going to start with green at the tops. So I'm going to kind of color downward. And it's okay that you leave those lines showing because it actually gives it a cool effect later. So what I do is I just make a nice straight line, and I'm gonna leave the tops white because eventually I'm gonna use the water from the water and a little bit of what color gets on my brush to paint the tops. Now I've added blue on all the bottoms, and I'm gonna take some water and connect the two. And that water activates the watercolor ink in the markers, and because it's water soluble, it's going to blend really nicely. Now you have to use washable markers because that tells us that water will activate it. If you use Sharpies, this will not work. So you do need to use just washable normal markers. And again, anywhere where I want color, I'm just gonna color in those spots. And you don't have to color everywhere because, like I said, once you activate the marker, it kind of spreads and gives light tones where you don't color. So I'm just adding water in all the spots and finishing up my picture. And for this one, since I can't splatter paint with markers, I'm just gonna draw some lines as if my crystal is shining some light on the world. And I'm just gonna kind of blend it so it has a softer effect and color everywhere. And that is our finished picture there.